Well, time certainly has passed. In 2 weeks' time, South Africa will head to the polls to cast their votes for a new government. The IEC held a briefing yesterday to outline their preparations for the upcoming elections. But how prepared are the political parties and even independent candidates? Well, we continue our Ask a Politician series this morning with a leader who is no stranger to the political sphere. So how prepared is Build One South Africa for the 29th of May? We are joined in studio by BOSA leader Mmusi Maimane. For this segment, Mr. Maimane, good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be here, and good morning to fellow South Africans. And just before, I think we as a moment, as a nation, I send my deep condolences to all those trapped in the building in George. I think South Africa, it's a seminal moment for us. And so our thoughts and prayers are with the families there. And I want to send strength to the teams that are working there incredibly. I wish them well.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's been difficult to watch it as well from various newsrooms because one can only imagine the agony of those that are trapped, those that have died under the rubble and those that did survive, but how difficult that may have been. Can we talk a little bit about your political journey as we start? And I said this before we actually started our chat, that it's really difficult to speak to Mmusi Maimane, the former leader of the official opposition, and not talk about that time, that tenure of your political career. When you look at where you are right now versus, 2019, which is 5 years, and a lot can happen in a very short period of time. Do you feel that you have had a political career that is on the up, or one that has seen a big fall from grace, if you will? How do you describe, that exit from the Democratic Alliance and how it feels now to be heading up BOSA? Is it a scramble to climb to the top again?
No, look, for me, it's been one of the most exciting journeys. Politics is, as the famous poem described it, a man in the arena. And when you are in the arena, you best be able to taste victory and be able to taste defeat. You best be able to shape yourself. You've got to develop. I take a long-term view. And ultimately, I'm at the best place I've ever been. I feel myself going into this election, it'll be my 6th election. I feel a couple of things. The one, I'm excited about the vision we share for South Africa. It was important, if we're going to transition this country from the old, which is the ANC DA, to the new, that you understand what came with the old. And having served in that institutional frame, I've come to learn what goes wrong, what are some of the successes, and now we're coming back to say it is absolutely crucial that we give birth to the new for the future of this country. Because let's be frank, none of us sitting here today, and I'm grateful to say this, that both the ANC and the DA are in decline, right? Which tells you that the old is dying off in some ways. South Africans are asking for a new pathway. And I'm excited about BOSA. I'm excited because it's a party that represents new South African ideals. It speaks to the building of one South Africa. It's a party that wants to stand up and say, let's put a job in every home. That for me, gives me hope for my kids. I wouldn't have said that 5 years ago. I can say that today to say, for my 13-year-old girl, for my 11-year-old son, 3-year-old, for many children in this country, let us create a new future for them and a new vision. And privileged to be a part of that. That's why I'm so deeply excited about this journey. So if you ask me, I'd rather see myself as a pioneer. Okay.
I remember the words that you used. You said, it is with great sadness that in order to continue this fight for the vision I strongly believe and the country I so dearly love, I will today step down as leader of the Democratic Alliance. And many analysts after that said, well, expect now to see that exodus of black leaders within the Democratic Alliance to leave. Just last week, we spoke to Herman Mashaba of Action SA, and he talked about that period for him as well. How do you describe that, watching the exodus, and certainly what those last few months were like within the Democratic Alliance? What was the final push for you over the edge?
When we went into the DA, I went in there believing strongly in building a party that works for all South Africans. And by and large, we're starting to succeed at that. The caucus was becoming more diverse. The voter base was starting to become more diverse. The governance, we were governing cities outside of Cape Town to do that. Yet there was this minority group, a few, who perhaps thought about the DA as, in some ways, Tony Leon's party, the idea of a fight-back campaign. Many of them and people like Helen Ziller, etc., had gathered together. And when in 2019 they saw an exodus of Afrikaans voters back to the Freedom Front Plus, they resolved to say they want their party back. And what they meant by that is they introduced a type of fight back. In fact, it's a subject of a book I'm releasing now. They introduced a fight back where it was a consolidation of minorities. It became a leadership that is all white. It created issues that were only of interest to white South Africans. And the clash between those two visions meant that the environment inside the DA became progressively more toxic. And to be honest with you, had we stayed, I don't think I'd be sitting here today. I don't think I'd have the appetite to want to serve, because the DA, sadly, along with many other parties, have chosen the rather simple but foolish route of consolidating around racial identity of minorities rather than offering a vision that is broad for all South Africans. The lazy path of not being able to deal with complexity of how do black people and white people work together, how do Muslims and Jews work together, instead of choosing just a narrow path. And I couldn't stay there. It became toxic. It became a place where I said to myself, I'd rather go out and truly build one South Africa and fight for it. Because it is an ideal that we should all be willing to sacrifice for. That is seeped into what this country is about. And so, yes, it was tough. It was difficult. I'll never forget that day on the 24th of October. Probably one of the more tougher days in my life, but one of the most, I felt relieved. I felt a burden had been lifted off my shoulder. And I hold no bitterness, no grudges. We have to recognize that when people want to stay a particular way and refuse to change, you have to charter a path that you can bring about the change you want to see.
If you'll allow me to then talk broader politics as we stay in 2019, I remember that at the Results Operations Center in 2019, you held a press briefing that I think many will describe as quite emotive. And in it, you talked about how South African politics and the South African political landscape is finding a very empty center.
Correct.
Explain that, and if you feel that, you know, that is where we are in 2024, and the real risks of that, where the center in South African politics simply isn't holding.
Yeah, and part of it is racial polarization. I want to say this categorically. With due respect, 2024 is not our 1994. 1994 was a particular period where parties organized themselves on racial identity. You had the Indian parties. I have the ballot paper from 1994 in my office. You had Indian parties, colored parties, white parties, black parties fighting an oppressive regime that is apartheid. If we hark back to that today, we are going to create again parties that are for black people, for white people, for Indian people, for colored people. That is not progressive. That is regressive. If you want a progressive future for South Africa, let's build new South African parties. Secondly, I hold the absolute view that centrists were disappeared. In 2019, you had many populist ideologies. In some ways, President Ramaphosa had come in this euphoric space. And we were starting to see society being polarized to the extreme left or to the extreme right. We've got to come back today and say and build a center. And that's what Build One South Africa is about. It's a centrist organization. It shares our values of a multiracial society. It has a policy framework that benefits from both public and private institutions. It charters a pathway where we say, where the majority of citizens in this country sit, they need to come into that. And we need to give birth to that. And it's a fight not only in South Africa, it's global. We're seeing populists rise everywhere who seek to win elections on the basis of even taking issues like immigration, but not talking about them sensibly. It's to create an enemy of the other so as to polarize society. And I think we've got to reclaim that centrist ground. We've got to build with South Africans there and ultimately be able to hold what is really expressed in our constitution in our country as ideals upon which all citizens, South Africa will belong to all who live in it. That ultimately, whether you are black, white, Indian or colored, you can find your space and shared prosperity in this country. That is our mission. And it's a lifelong mission. It's a mission I'll give my life to. And where I find parties that want to divide us and send us backwards, we have to reject that with everything in our must. Because if we do that, we will introduce a new form of apartheid without really calling it apartheid, but it will have similar effects of division an oppression of one race over another, or
Okay.
a dominance of one race over another.
Right, let's talk about Build One South Africa, because I worry and I ask myself if people understand what BOSA is, the structures of the party, and really what the party stands for. Is that something that you think you still need to work on? I mean, at some point we were hearing you saying that you're not actually running for elections, that you're supporting those that do want to run as civic organizations and as independent candidates. Where are you now? When did that sort of evolution take place for you?
BOSA has been a vehicle that obviously when we started, we wanted to be a grassroots-based movement. I cannot deny the fact that when I left, I didn't just leave the DA. I left Parliament also, because I could have stayed in Parliament, right? But I thought Parliament had become too distant from the people. It became this institution we watched for entertainment, but it didn't solve our issues. Communities were left behind. If you and I are sitting here in Johannesburg and we don't have water, we don't have a hospital, we don't have a school, who are we going to hold accountable? Who are we going to talk to? So I said, firstly, let's amend the Electoral Amendment Bill. We fought that case in the Constitutional Court and took it to Parliament. I said, if we're going to choose candidates as BOSA, let them come from the people. People made the mistake to say it's independence, etc. But actually, we really wanted to give expression for communities to be at the forefront of the agenda. And I'm grateful that when you look at the BOSA list, it's diverse. It's got South Africans from all walks of life. It's got South Africans who represent constituencies. They represent someone. They didn't arrive on a party jacket. We didn't choose them from the back room somewhere. The communities did that. In fact, even to me as leader of BOSA, I was surprised when I met some of the candidates because they'd been part of our program and training. But when I saw them, I realized the caliber of people that they are, but also I'd never myself pre-selected them, which is a powerful thing and a risk you've got to take. And thirdly, BOSA had been a government in working because we didn't want to build an archaic political party, have branches, have NECs, have all of that. It's old. No one is thinking about that. You don't care about that. What you care about is the fact that you have public representatives who will work for you. Power to the people, amandla ngawethu. So let us do that. Let us modernize politics. We can't be building for the future and operating like yesterday. So we have been intentional about saying, let's put communities at the center, let's re-inculcate democracy, so that its long-term vision, when we enter into Parliament, you will have public representatives who say, I come from this community, I fight for this. When we vote on the budget in Parliament, and there's a water item, as an example, suddenly, the member of Parliament from Johannesburg can stand up and say more allocation must be done if we're to fix the water problems in Joburg. We've got to be, and they're united by this shared vision that says on a 10-point plan, we've become less ideologues because in some ways we're living in a society that is looking for practical plan. We never launched the manifesto, we launched the plan. We said, let's agree. This is how we fix ESCOM. We introduce SMRs. This is how we fix Transnet. We split it into its component parts so that goods can move. This is how we keep our communities safe. We devolve policing. This is how we educate our kids. They can't pass at 30%. They must pass at 50%. We must ensure that ultimately education is priority. We've got to look for ethical leaders. So what we've done intentionally is to give power to communities to say, once your leader becomes corrupt, you can remove them. And my long-term dream is that the president faces the same scrutiny, that communities can be able to mobilize to say we need a new president, not rather than this party system that we have. It's an anomaly. That's why you end up with Zondo commissions, etc., etc. So we want to reform. That's why we're focused on the future. That's why I couldn't stay in the old. We are building a modern, democratic, community-based political party. And we changed it because Parliament became too lazy to do the hard work. Against all advice, President Motlanthe raised this issue. Everyone has raised this issue. But Parliament became a party hack. And that's why even in the Concord ruling against President Zuma, Parliament was found to be derelict in its duty. And I think what we've got to do is reform it, reform the institution, and ultimately pioneer a new pathway so that democracy is alive for our kids, right, and we can have parties that represent them.
Well, this is what we're going to do. We're going to take a short break, and then we've asked a few South Africans as well to send questions to you that they hope that you'll be able to answer. And so we'll play some of those as well, and then we will get Mmusi Maimane's policy proposal from Build One South Africa. Well, Welcome back. Well, we continue our conversation with Build One South Africa leader Mmusi Maimane here in studio. We chat now about his policy proposals for the nation in the upcoming elections. So let's talk about this quickly. I think this has been a big talking point, certainly in the run-up to today. The president expected this afternoon at 2 o'clock to sign into law the NHI bill. We've gotten polarized responses from experts and pundits. Do you think this is a step in the right direction?
No, I don't. I categorically reject the NHI bill, and I think it will face legal challenge because I think that it is a populist move. No one can deny in South Africa that we need to broaden access to healthcare. I certainly am one who is more supportive of a hybrid model that includes both public-private and the state as an underwriter. And the principle at core is to say, when you layer healthcare at a primary healthcare level, which is what most South Africans will have, you need to be able to open up both public and private institutions for people to be able to gain access to that. So let's imagine it from the perspective of a gogo who's sitting in Limpopo, goes to a public institution, finds there's no help. They can go to a private institution, and an insurer, which is state-driven, can underwrite the transaction and pay for the doctor or the service in that regard. This way, we ensure that access is given to everybody. In the same way, in secondary and tertiary operations, if you are looking for the best hepatologists, you can go to a public institution, i.e. Groote has got some of the best, or you can go to Baragwanath, who's got some of incredible specialists who have been trained at our institutions. You should be able to go through that even if you're a private medical aid holder, which at this point in time our laws prohibit. So you got to be able to go there and finance and pay for public health service that you'd be able to deem there. So it's a hybrid model in combination. It broadens access, it democratizes opportunity for health, and also ensures that actually what you don't end up doing is that as people are working and making medical aid contributions, when they retire at the age of 65, that they don't suddenly get added on to the public healthcare burden as a function of the fact that now they're not working and are able to do that. So I think, to me, it's a misstep. It's an ANC's populist gimmick. They know in their research that we are financially incapable of financing it. It's a 500 billion rands expenditure. And the assumption that you are suddenly going to have money. I don't know whether ANC thinks it's going to make money. The only way it's going to get money is to increase our debt services, which means that, sure, you'll be able to increase debt, finance NHI, but trust me, there'll be no more police, there'll be no more schooling, in essence, will begin to decrease in its quality, and what you're going to end up doing is bankrupting the South African fiscus, all for a populist move just before an election. I think the model is bad, and I think President Ramaphosa is playing into populist hands.
Okay. Well, that's an interesting view. I want to start to playing out some of our clips, and as we run this feature, I've been asking some of you guys to send us your videos of the questions that you have for the politicians that we speak to in the run-up to the 29th of May elections. We've got two individuals who sent in fact, similar questions. Take a look at these.
My question is, when is the postgraduate experience, like for master's and PhD student, going to be taken as work experience, as we know that these postgraduate students mostly, they do most of the research which is applicable in the industry and elsewhere.
Since from 2015 till now, Ronaldi metriki renaleng re dutse fela batho ba ba sena next ba teng mo officing ba bereka bona ra safara ra phanda bo khaitse dia ba bereki mara ba re tshepisitse. It's been 10 years from now on.
Two questions there from citizens. Mawande Sigwinta essentially saying, when will our postgraduate master's experience translate into work experience? That's a desperate situation. It's an expensive process to go through. It's a lot of work, and then you get into the work market and it's not considered work experience.
Yeah, look, I'm in the process of completing a PhD, so I can appreciate the sacrifices that people put onto this work. I think we've got to take a step back. That's why election campaign was a job in every home, right? And that's 2 million jobs over the next 5 years that are aggregated to what's putting in every home. When the policy of the government at the moment says only under 35 can work, what we want to do is aggregate it in terms of what we do at home. And when you look at the economy, you've got to look at it in two forms. I think of it as a garden. In the garden, you've got to make sure the conditions are correct. And that's why I've been very deliberate about let's fix Eskom, keep the lights on. I know load shedding is on suspension until it comes back, but it will come back on the 30th of May. And secondly, I do think that we need to break up Transnet so that goods can move in and out and people can move in and out. And thirdly, I do think you need to keep our communities safe, educate our young people, and then build a capable state. So once you've got all of those elements together with a broad infrastructure build, naturally you've got to then say, what are the things that you plant in there? And particularly for graduates and PhDs, we know that unemployment, once somebody is post high school and has got a degree, decreases progressively. So what we've got to ensure is we've already allocated a 220 billion rands into the investment into the township economy so we can stimulate micro enterprise. Secondly, we think that we need to focus on manufacturing so people with PhDs can be able to innovate in that space. Thirdly, I think we need to increase intra-trade in Africa so that we can expand. 60 million people are not a big market, but once you add all the way up to 1.4 billion in Africa, suddenly you've got more customers, you've got more goods that you've got to do that. You roll out broad infrastructure so that people can begin to build. And particularly for young people, lastly, I want to introduce a one-year civilian program so that young people can work in that year, so 6 months internship in government programs, and then the next 6 months we pay them to study so that you have the sense upon which this question of experience is eradicated by giving young people work experience over a year, and then you can be able to use them in various spaces. So our macroeconomic plan and fiscal and policy is focus on expenditure that's driven towards work experience, and rather than focus on self-programs such as the financing of the state, making sure that politicians are well looked after, and then financing debt. Let's rather focus on an expansionary model, invest in infrastructure so that we can change the work experience.
Here's the issue, though, Mr. Maimane, is that not a lot of what you're saying is new. I mean, you're talking about dedicating money to essentially giving young people a place to gain experience. We talked about the youth wage subsidy for years, and that seemed to have failed quite dismally in the country. You're talking about stimulating intra-Africa trade. Well, that's why we've got the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. So some of that work already being done, but still...
The truth of the matter is this, is that despite... the ANC is also serious about corruption, and yet corruption is on the rise, right? So let's be clear. When it comes to economic policy, there are certain fundamentals you've got to put on the table. And when I talk about the fixing of ESCOM and the introduction of SMRs, the government has not done that and are not thinking about that. When we talk about cross-border trade, it's not just pronouncing a free trade area. It's actually about building infrastructure so that it's easier to move goods from South Africa to Zimbabwe. It's easier for a South African vessel to move from here to China than it is to get to Senegal. That tells you the fact that even though there can be a pronouncement on something, actually the state is incapable of being able to achieve that. And what I'm saying is the first 100 days of a BOSA government, we're going to make sure that we build capability into government, attract the best skills so that we can deliver. The reason I left Parliament, in some ways, is also to spend a number of years in the private sector understanding how a job is in fact created. Many politicians who sit in Parliament have never done that. Therefore, they don't have a clue.
But here's the issue, and allow me to step in here. The issue was not that the policy proposals in and of themselves are problematic, right? And you're right, that it is about the execution thereof. But for a party like Build One South Africa, which is a new entrant into the political sphere, to have any sort of execution, you're going to have quite a bit of collaboration with other political parties, correct?
Yes.
I mean, that part is very, very clear. Even where you've had an ANC government, the ideas are at the top. The trickle-down effect is where things go wrong when the money is sent down to municipal levels and local government levels. You need to have good relationships with other political parties. Post the 29th, you need to start having those conversations. Who are you not willing to work with? Who do you not trust?
I don't trust people who are corrupt. So anyone who have sent lists of people who were implicated in Zondo Commission, we're not going to discuss that. You can't discuss corruption with corrupt people. You can't deal with corruption with corrupt people. You can't make laws with lawbreakers. It just is an antithesis. Also, I'm not inclined to work with people who are racist. So people who want to divide our society on the basis of race, I'm not willing to work with. So my vision is that after the 29th, we have a grand coalition of the opposition. We bring citizens together. But it cannot be a grand coalition of the opposition simply to remove the ANC. It must be predicated on a plan. That's why the policy proposals that we have, you are correct. Some of them are not unique to BOSA, but they are such that you can invite people to bring points of agreement. Let's take education as a simple one. A 40% dropout rate is something we can agree that you can't have that. The introduction of an effective ECD sector is an important thing. Voucherizing for kids so that they can choose which school they can do that, we can all agree on. So now, having worked in the 2016 coalitions that stayed in Johannesburg, in Tshwane, I bring that skill to be able to bring South Africans together. And I've been able to speak both from the Freedom Front Plus, the FF Plus, to the EFF, in a way of being able to speak to both leaders and be able to say, what is in the common interest of the country and how can we work together? And that would be true for any party. And that's why I think, for me, the pathway, and South Africans need not fear the 29th. The ANC is going to come here and tell people that it's better the devil you know, and let's give them a one-party dominance. That's absolute hogwash. What we've got to tell South Africans is this, is that actually a grand coalition of the opposition is important, it's possible. It will charter a transition. Mm-hmm. It will ensure that ideas from all parties that are the best can be brought together. Parties don't have to be in a formal coalition, in that some of them might say, we don't agree with this, but we will use our votes to sponsor you in being able to elect a presiding officer, a president, a speaker, pass the budget. Yeah. And then once you've done that exercise, we can build a state that is free from capture and appoint the best people to the civil service. I think that's what the next 5 years has got to be about. And I think South Africans must express confidence in that and vote for it come the 29th of May. That's why I'm challenging people to vote for vote for BOSA, because that's going to be in the room to deliver that sort of trajectory going forward.
I'm seeing here that you declared some of your funding, and that some of your funding was received from Jessica Bridget Slack. What's that, 6 million rand? Martel Moshel, 2 million rand. And the list goes on. RH Investments, 500,000 rand, those donations. But these are regular donors also for political parties like the Democratic Alliance and Action SA. So it begs the question, when last did you speak to Helen Zille and John Steenhuisen, and what do those conversations sound like?
I traveled with John and the team of opposition leaders to Germany. That was in October. I have no bad blood with people. Helen Zille herself won't talk to me. That's okay. That's her own choice. I've reached out, literally put out my hand, and she certainly rejected that idea. I don't hold any grudges. We cannot sacrifice the future of this country at personal altars or egos. There's a country here, and therefore I have the privilege of being able to speak not just to John Steenhuisen, but to everybody else. Then are we going to go have a bride together? Maybe not. But what we have to do is that when we are called upon to do what is right for the people of this country, I can assure you, ego will be set aside and we will do what's best for this nation.
Okay, I need to close it off with a final thought. Your message to South Africans as they really start to make their decisions towards the 29th of May. And I'm talking about essentially the key messaging of BOSA. We saw a lot of controversy over the Democratic Alliance flag advert, for instance, and you're more than welcome to share your thoughts on that. But the key messaging that you want to be sharing with the electorate.
This election is about change. This election is about ensuring that we fix the South Africa that we've bequeathed. Part of my dilemma with the flag is that any leader who wants to lead this country recognizes this simple truth, that you are simply an author of the next chapter in the story of South Africa. Your job is not to burn the book. Your job is to write the next. And what's the next chapter for South Africa? It's about post-liberation, post-ANC. It's about ensuring that we really do build one South Africa, because ultimately, when we bring South Africans together, we can prosper. This election is about BOSA putting a job in every home, educating our young people, and keeping our communities safe. And I can say for me personally, however difficult, however successful or not, I come back and I bring not only my own new leadership quality and experience, but leaders in society who are capable, who are ethical, who've never stolen anyone's money, and are dedicated as patriots of this country to build a South Africa that works for all. Vote for BOSA on the 29th.
All right, Mr. Maimane, an absolute pleasure having you in studio. Thank you so much for speaking to us. And we will connect once again in Midrand at the Results Operations Center on the floor, where we will be there, of course, watching these political leaders as they keep their eyes on the screen as the numbers start to come in after you've all cast your vote. Mmusi Maimane is, of course, the leader of Build One South Africa.